So Ray Dalio has recently come out with some warnings about the U.S. debt crisis, and he's basically given America 3 years to get their act in order and to sort of right the fiscal ship of state. Take a listen to a couple of clips that he recently put out about the national debt and the urgency to act immediately, and I'll give you my thoughts afterwards.
I think the first thing is the debt issue. We have a very severe supply-demand problem. So we think there's debt, and some people think, oh, we'll handle it because we've handled it so far. I don't think they understand the mechanics of debt. By the way, I've written the draft of a book that anybody can see on social media, on particularly LinkedIn, that goes through the mechanics of the debt. But there's a supply-demand problem, so that they have to sell a quantity of debt that the world is not going to want to buy. And that's a set of circumstances that is imminent. Okay, that's paramount importance. Then we're going to have to deal that the deficit must go from what will be projected now to be about 7.2% of GDP to about 3% of GDP. Otherwise, there will be a supply-demand problem. Okay, that's a big deal. You are going to see shocking developments in terms of how that's going to be dealt with. Things that may not have happened in our lifetimes, but things that have happened throughout history. So that's an immediate consideration.
Wait,
the interest rate.
What do you mean, austerity? Like that?
There are many. What do you do when you don't have an adequate supply-demand balance? There may be restructurings of debt. There may be exerting pressures on countries to own the debt, to buy the debt, political pressures on countries. There may be cutting the payments to some creditor countries off for political reasons and so on. So there may be monetizations of debt. If you look at history and see the repeating of what do countries do when they're in this kind of situation, there are lessons from history that repeat. And so just as we're seeing political and geopolitical shifts that seem unimaginable to a lot of people, to most people, if you just look at history, you'll see these things repeating over and over again. So you will be surprised, we will be surprised by some of the developments that will seem equally shocking as those developments that we've seen. So when I look at it, I think that these are of paramount importance. Then we're going to deal with the internal. We're right at the brink of starting to find out that the amount of selling of government debt collapsed, right? We didn't issue government debt. And now we're going to issue a lot of government debt. And so when we look at the buyers, there appears to be a significant shortage of the buyers for that government debt. But we're now at the brink of being able to see what that supply-demand picture looks like as we go over the next year and two.
Given the challenges that we face,
I think that right now we are at a decision-making point and very close to a recession. And I'm worried about something worse than a recession if this isn't handled well. A recession is 2 negative quarters of GDP, and whether it goes slightly there, we always have those things. We have something that's much more profound. We have a breaking down of the monetary order. We are going to change the monetary order because we cannot spend the amounts of money, so we have that problem. And when we talk about the dollar and we talk about tariffs, we have that. We are having profound changes in our domestic order, how ruling is existing, and we're having profound changes in the world order. Such times are very much like the 1930s. I've studied history, and this repeats over and over again. So if you take tariffs, if you take debt, if you take the rising power challenging the existing power, if you take those factors and look at the factors, those changes in the orders, the systems, are very, very disruptive. How that's handled could produce something that is much worse than a recession. The United States will run a deficit of about 7.5% of GDP if the Trump tax cuts are continued, which I expect. And that deficit needs to be cut to 3% of GDP, must be cut to 3% of GDP. All policymakers and the president should have a pledge to get it to 3% of GDP, because otherwise we're likely to have a problem. And that can be done.
Sure, but I mean, you're talking about a pretty compressed timeline. I think most Americans are thinking this is in the distant future. You're saying it's imminent if it's not addressed.
It looks like, the way I penciled these numbers out, it looks like it's a 3-year type of timeline. And you also have to do the adjustment, the cutbacks, and make that adjustment. You have to do it when things are relatively good. And you have to do it promptly, because otherwise the debt accumulates and the debt problem gets worse. It's like if I'm speaking with you about your heart. I'm a doctor, and I'm talking with you, and I'm saying, okay, Tucker, you have this situation. Okay, the plaque is there. You're in a high risk of this heart attack, essentially. Now, what are you going to do about it? Here are the things. Maybe it's exercise, maybe it's this and that, but in one way or another, you've got to do this now, because you're in better health now. Don't wait for this to happen and then try to make it better.
So Ray Dalio is largely correct here. I mean, he's basically saying that we have 3 years to get our house in order. And part of the issue here is that we need money from other countries to be able to pay our bills. And when we issue this debt, it goes to auction, and other countries and entities have to come in and bid on that debt. And what's happening is there's sort of a crisis of confidence. They're not confident, China, Japan, they're just not confident that if they loan us money, we're going to be able to pay it back. So what they do is they have this auction where they bid out, and if they don't have a high level of confidence that we can pay this money back, then they're going to charge higher rates of interest. And those rates are going to, as it's sort of inversely correlated to their confidence. So as their confidence and our ability to pay that debt back drops, then the interest that they're going to demand on that debt is going to start going up. And this is just a spiral that gets worse and worse and worse. So he's saying 3 years to get to right our fiscal ship of state. Penn Wharton recently came out with a famous study in which they said if we don't right our fiscal ship of state by 2040, that no combination of raising taxes or reducing spending will arrest the financial collapse of our nation. So we're definitely in the zone here where we have to, we have to either dramatically reduce spending, dramatically increase revenue, or some combination of the two. And every year that goes by where we fail to do either of those two means that the fix on the back end is going to be even more severe, even more draconian. What does this mean? This means that in the next 10 to 15 years, our country is likely to need huge infusions of capital to avoid that debt spiral, to avoid financial collapse, the likes of which we haven't seen since the Great Depression. So what that really means is that if you have the lion's share of your retirement savings in IRAs or 401ks, you need to act while tax rates are historically low. We are on the cusp of Trump extending his tax cuts for another 8 years, which means we'll probably, if you count 2025, we'll have historically low tax rates for another 9 years. But come 2034, I tell you, tax rates are not going to simply revert back to what they were in 2017. They're likely to go much, much higher. People say, hey, you can only go so high without affecting, economic growth in our country. Well, guess what? We've been there before. We had tax rates in the immediate wake of, in the last 2 years of World War II that were as high as 94%. And from 60 to 63, they were as high as 89%. Throughout the entire decade of the 70s, they were as high as 70% on those high marginal tax brackets. We're likely to see those types of tax rates in the future if we can't get our fiscal house in order. Thanks for watching. And if you want to learn more, go to davemcknight.com. Thanks.